Hi, this is Marjohn Love, and this is Marjohn's Musings. And today's show is the Rites of Spring. The Rites of Spring. Did I suddenly develop a stammer? No. Today is Good Friday, and last night my husband and I sang at Maundy Thursday service. Most people know that Good Friday is the commemoration of the crucifixion of Jesus. For believers, it's a very important holy day. It's the day that our sins were washed away by the sacrifice Jesus made for us. When I was a little girl, it was a time of fasting and self-reflection, prayer. In the Catholic Church, as a child, we would go through the 12 stations of the cross and kneel at each station of the cross to remember the suffering that Jesus went through before he was crucified. Well, I'm not a little girl. And as I grew up, I began to question this great sacrifice because I saw death around me. The first time I saw death, I was 3 years old, and it was my great-grandmother. Later on, there was news footage of the Korean War between North and South Korea, and the Americans backed South Korea. I had a family member serve in that war. I can remember years and years and years, many of the prayers that we did were prayers for peace. We would pray for peace. And in those days, the priest faced the crucifix behind the altar, not the congregation. So the Mass was a mystery. I used to sing in the choir in Latin, Dona nobis pacem, give us peace. I hope that we can experience a time of peace, but I'm not sure. You know, Al Gore came out 20 years ago almost now, talking about the effects climate change was going to have on agriculture, and how if we did not prepare properly, there would be drought, and with that, famine. And there are hundreds of thousands of refugees, especially in arid countries where they depended on 10 or 20 inches of rainfall per year. That's not a lot of rainfall over 365 days. As a young girl, not a child, but as a teenager, I got very interested in a Buddhist monk named Thich Nhat Hanh. He's now in his 80s. He's had a stroke. His closest ally in his Buddhist practice wrote up his most famous teachings and the teachings of his later years. I've been reading The Art of Living. It put me into a theological crisis, if you will, because As the Dalai Lama pointed out when he was at the TD Center, Christianity and Buddhism are quite different. In Christianity, we believe that each human being is born with a soul, and that soul comes from God, and even after we die, that soul continues to exist. I find it fascinating that there's this little girl you can find as a meme on Facebook. She does this whole little thing talking to her daddy. I think they're English or Australian. They have that accent, and she's saying, "Duh, I don't understand." Maybe they're Scottish. She's like, "Did Jesus know the Easter Bunny? And why does the Easter Bunny leave eggs? Bunnies don't even lay eggs." And the whole concept of the egg as the renewal symbol, the rebirth, the new birth. When I was a little girl, we had a lot of Easter rituals at my grandmother's house, and one of them was to dye Easter eggs. We would get white eggs, which were the majority of the eggs in those days were white, that you could commercially buy at the supermarket. And we would put these little tablets into boiling water and then let it cool, and we would put the hard-boiled eggs into the dye with little aluminum or copper egg dippers. I still do that. I still make a few Easter eggs each year. And I find it fascinating. In my La Paz set, it says magic crayon. And what it is it's a stick of wax with no color in it, so that when you write on the white egg, you don't see it unless you're very careful looking at the waxy residue. But when you dunk the egg into the dye, there your name or whatever you wrote appears like magic in the dye. The Buddhists, at least of the sect that Thich Nhat Hanh belongs to, they don't believe that Jesus died for their sins and purchased their eternal life in heaven with his blood. The Buddha lived a couple hundred years, I think like 600 years before Jesus was born. So Thich Nhat Hanh says, we can speak of two kinds of Buddhism: popular Buddhism and deep Buddhism. Different audiences need different kinds of teachings, so the teaching should always be adapted in order to be appropriate to the audience. And think about, you would not tell a little child the same story you might tell an adolescent or an adult. There are different intellectual capabilities and different emotional maturities. So he goes on to say, this is why there are thousands of different points of entry into the teachings, enabling many kinds of people to benefit and experience transformation and relief from their suffering. And the next line is really important. In popular Buddhist culture, it is said that there are countless hell realms that we can fall into after dying. Many temples display vivid illustrations of what can happen to us in the hell realms. For example, if we lie in this lifetime, our tongue will be cut out in the next. This is a kind of skillful means, and he puts skillful means in quotes, to motivate people to live their lives in more ethical ways. This approach may help some people, but it may not help others. And I know in Christian teaching, if you live a good and ethical life and you are compassionate and upstanding and you have good moral underpinnings and you behave in a responsible way, your reward, if you're faithful, is to go to heaven. And if you cavort in the realm of the 7 deadly sins, which we've talked about in other shows, your reward is eternal torment, much like the hell realms in Buddhist popular culture. The Buddhists and the Christians, even though they're both teaching, if you behave well, then you will be rewarded. If you behave reprehensibly, if you commit evil, if you enjoy evil, if you perpetrate evil, then you will be punished, if not now, later. I'm not sure people still believe that. In fact, I don't really know what people believe. You know, there we were at church on one of the most somber holidays of the year, Maundy Thursday. And there couldn't have been 40 people in the church, including the minister, the guest speaker, the choir, and the organist. But the malls are slammed, and the traffic is crazy. I went to pick up some stuff at Market Basket. I had to go home. There was no parking to be had at Market Basket. And there were several other cars lurking, waiting for someone to leave. I thought, heck with this, and I went home empty-handed. Thich Nhat Hanh goes on to say, if we want to climb a ladder, we have to let go of one rung in order to reach the next one. If we cling to the views we presently hold, we cannot progress. We are all on a path. We are all making progress, and along the way, we need to be ready to abandon our current view so we can be open to new, better, and deeper views, ones which bring us closer to the truth, or one which is more helpful for transforming our suffering and cultivating happiness. Whatever views we hold, we should be careful not to get caught up in thinking that our view is the best and that only we have the truth. The spirit of Buddhism is very tolerant. We should always keep our hearts open to the people who have different views or beliefs. Practicing openness and non-attachment to views is fundamental in Buddhism. That is why, even though there are dozens of different schools of Buddhism, Buddhists have never waged a holy war against each other. I found that really profound. Yesterday in the news, the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia were implicated in some situations that made me distressed, and I thought, Marjohn's musings did not start out to be a commentary on the news. It started out to be one woman doing a video journal about what it was like to live on beautiful Cape Ann and to experience life here. So I went to Marshall's and I got a fab find. If this blouse doesn't wake you up and say, "Hi, it's spring," I don't think anything will. I'm like, oh my goodness, I saw it jumping out of the rack at me, and I thought, it has been so gray and cold and rainy and snowy and blustery and hail and blizzard conditions. And guess what? Even though Sunday's Easter, it's supposed to snow again on Monday. My Easter outfit is a sleeveless dress. I think I have to wear something else. So I told you I was taking an Oriental painting class with Carla Mattioli. I brought in this mother panda and her baby because one of our assignments was to paint the four gentlemen. Now, in America, we would call a motif like this cliché. Everybody has to learn the four gentlemen. The first one is winter into spring, and that's the plum blossom. And the second one is the orchid, which is at the edge between fresh and salt water and the land. And it's this very delicate wildflower. The third one is the bamboo. It represents summer. And the fourth is the chrysanthemum, the autumn. And I told you, like, I'm trying to learn to use a new type of brush that's very different than the brushes that I learned on when I took watercolor at Rockport Art Association. And I'm not showing you my paintings because I think they're good. I'm showing you my paintings because I know they're not that great, and that even at 65, it's okay to be a beginner. The Buddhists call that the beginner's mind, the ability to be open to new ideas and try new things. Like, if you have to be perfect, it's very difficult to learn anything new. So I'm trying, not necessarily succeeding, to learn how to paint in an Oriental style. And so this is plum blossoms in the boned style. Boned meaning it has an outline. And these are done on rice paper that comes in a roll. So they don't even store the paintings the same way we do, like in a flat file. They store them in a tube to protect them because you roll them up. This is plum blossoms in an unboned style, and it's from a farther distance. And I think I showed you the teaching prompt for this. This is long-lasting or eternal, and I finally got my teacher's okay that I had practiced it enough times that it was actually recognizable as the kanji it was supposed to be. But I want to show you my disaster. I got ambitious, and I decided I was going to paint this plate. My little panda bear came out looking like a weasel. The panda mama's face is just like, she's jollier than I am. By the way, this panda is by Will Nelson. We were taught in American art school that European painters copied the masters, but that after the Impressionists, it was very frowned upon to copy someone else's artwork. And here I am in this brush and ink class, copying out boned and unboned paintings of Chinese masters. And we were supposed to pick our own kanji. So this is mine, my practices of kanji. What I picked was the dragon. I did that because I'm born in 1952 in October. And so I'm not only dragon year, I'm dragon month. In Oriental painting, they're very much interested in the empty space of the paper as well as the marks made upon it. So there's actually like a golden mean rectangle of how to lay out a painting so that you have the beautiful white space of the paper interacting with the figure that you put on it. So our last one, our teacher, Carla Mattioli, gave us this translucent, very fine paper from Japan, and we were to make a chrysanthemum. And the colors that they are using are a bit different than what I'm used to. I'm used to Winsor Newton. I'm not used to the Oriental paints yet. But I had fun, and I actually got a good commendation on this one. The teaching for it was kind of interesting. You started out with grayed down ink, and you put the definition of the little petals in the center, and then you filled in your color on top of that. And I thought, oh, okay, so that's not that different than pen and ink with a wash over the top. I got into my panda situation because the lesson on bamboo, she gave out pandas because in Chinese painting, they tried to put an animal or a bird or an insect or an amphibian with the plant sort of as an ecosystem. They're very conscious of the land as earth and the sky as air and water and the life force fire as in sunshine but also warmth. It's been very interesting for me. So I had attempted to copy a bamboo. I didn't like the Venetian blind look of the background. Rice paper is a lot harder to run a wash on European style paper made in the United States. You wet your brush and you run a line and it's slanted slightly, and then you pick up that wet edge and you don't see the striation. Still have a lot to learn, so I signed up for another sequence. But this one was my homework in the interim, and it's lotus blossoms. And there's my little kanji. There are very similar kanji, so it's really important that when you do the calligraphy for kanji that you get them in the correct orientation. So I got this box. It's called Inkless Drawing Writing Fabric, and it came with 100 kanji, and I called my son because he had taken Japanese and many of the meanings crossed over from Chinese to Japanese. And there are some like universal kanji. And I said to my son, "Hun, when I got the box, there were 100 kanji, but there were no translations." He goes, "Oh, that's so Chinese." And I'm thinking, what? And he's like, yeah. In China, the student has to be humble and seeking, not like a demanding American student. We were practicing on newsprint. I was going through a pile of newsprint, and although newsprint is inexpensive, it's still trees. So I went ahead and I bought this practice paper, which has grids on it to teach you how to make the character not only the right black mark, but the right black mark in the right place. And here in the center of the practice mat is eternal or long-lasting, the very first one you learn that has all the brush strokes, or most of them anyway. And so here's my Kanji sheet, and here are the bones, all the different kinds of brush strokes that you learn. And why this is kind of personal for me and fun is it's clayed. You take water and your brush and you press down and lift, or you make a shape and turn it. And there's little arrows inside these bones to show you how to make them. And what's really kind of fascinating about it is that if you make a shape on the cloth with plain water, later on you'll see during the show all those marks will disappear. And this kit was the more expensive. You can get just the scroll. But I wanted to learn the bones. I wanted to learn what the different Oriental brushstrokes are like. But you can get a plain scroll. And this kit comes with 2 brushes and a little water thing and all those 100 kanji. So I wrote an email to the website and I said, is there a translation available? And they didn't respond to me. I don't know what happened, but my teacher said, well, I might be able to help you out with some of them. And so she brought me in a book to borrow that has like the Tao, the way, or tranquility, or piety, or happiness, these different spirit of the Chinese character. And I was like, oh, fascinating. And what it does is, this one here is Zhen. It's patience. And there are little boxes, like these boxes, and they show you in order which strokes to make. And some of the older kanji that have survived, 1,000 years, are very simple. And some of the modern ones can get really complicated. And here's that eternity again. And it's kind of interesting, like I have 5 or 6 different versions of it now. Jung. All of them are slightly different. It's sort of like looking at people's penmanship. I told you in my drawing class from the great courses, the teacher, David Brody, was saying that drawing, and therefore painting, came about before language was encoded. And in China, they grew up together because the writing implement was a brush. It was not, a pen or a piece of burnt charcoal. Or in Europe, they used to have silver point. They would draw and write with sticks of silver, little fine sticks of silver. As you can see, that dark mark I made is disappearing. And I'm kind of a nexus for this idea. Back in the early 90s, I was in Rites on 95, headed south towards Boston, and you have to take the overpass and come back around. And I was in there and I was trying out Kolonsky sable brushes, which, they can run $100+ per brush. And so that you didn't make a mistake and get a brush you didn't want, charrettes would have a tester brush and water, and you would write on clay paper to see, did the brush you were buying make the mark you wished to make with the brush? And this gentleman said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm testing brushes," and I showed him. And he goes, "But it's fading away." He goes, "That's very Zen." And he came up with the Zen board. And later, the Canadians are like, "You can't claim a copyright on clayed paper." And they came up with the Buddha board. And in 2011, the magic writing cloth scroll was developed. But it was so strange. I'm there in charrettes, and this man goes over to the counter and buys every piece of clay paper throughout the entire charrettes chain and markets this design. I thought, if I had a nickel for every one of those they sold, I would be a wealthy woman. It'd be fun. I don't want to roll this just yet. I'm going to leave it dry. But I have other things to talk to you about. A while back, like maybe, a year and a half ago or so, I talked to you about making Kumihimo jewelry. This is another idea from the Orient. It became very popular in Japan. I've been working on doing a Kumihimo that I found in this small book. And I'll show it to you because some of you might not have seen the earlier show. What you have is, think of an old-fashioned phonograph, how the turntable on top spins. So you have this little two-part wheel. There's a spindle and a base, and then there's a little torus-shaped dish. Think you could pop a donut in there. It's the negative shape of a donut. And what you do is you take a big eye needle, and a big eye needle, they mean big. I can stick my finger through that needle, okay? But it's very thin, so it's two tiny strips of metal that are welded together at one end's a straight tip and the other end's a curved tip. And you take a vial of beads, pour them into the little dish, and spin it by hand. Poke your needle into the spinning beads, and the beads slide up the thread as if by magic. If you had to do it one or two at a time, you'd be there for like days. But these come on 5, 6, 7, 8 at a time, and you just slide them on the thread. Once you have as many beads as your pattern calls for, you set them up on little bobbins. These are little lightweight plastic bobbins. You can get weighted bobbins, and then you have to have a little clamp and a weight on the bottom to hold the tension. It's set up in north, south, east, west, and what you do is you take one bead each pass, poke the bead underneath, and move the thread. Then you turn the disc a quarter turn, pick up the next bobbin, and put the next bead in, and poke it in place. And it's very calming. It's quiet. You can think when you're doing it, and your hands are busy. It helps with what meditation masters call the monkey mind, where your thoughts are going 1,000 miles an hour. And as you can see, I've made quite a bit of this necklace. And this one was fun because it's counted Kumihimo. So it has one big bead, and because I counted it precisely, that big bead shows up on the same location all along the chain. It's sort of more complicated than the simple braided bead that I made to make my sister a bracelet. And then I was having fun with it, so I decided I went to the Marlborough Gem and Jewelry Show, and there I purchased findings, silver findings, and one of the ones that I found to be attractive and interesting had a garnet. It had 3 spaces for, so I'm going to make that into a blingy bracelet for me. This is something that you can kind of like get into. So I made her an anklet, and somewhere else I have like a great big necklace. I get going with these things and I wind up like, I don't know if any of you are old Doctor Who fans, but in the old days, there was one Doctor Who had a scarf that just trailed out because he had a companion, and he told this companion he would come back. And so, you know, she kept working on that scarf, And he finally did show up, and the scarf was quite long. I was at the second glance, and I found beadwork that was made on a loom. It's really lovely. The person who made it must be dainty because they're not quite big enough for me. I've got to find myself a young girl or a very slender person who might like this beautiful beaded cuff and necklace set. And then on PBS recently, they've been showing a series of shows about the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb. I actually got to see a traveling exhibit of Tutankhamun. You know, they had a replica of the beautiful gold mask. And now there's all this scuttlebutt. Was it really for Nefertiti? It's funny how some things, that was years ago, and I have these little lightweight, what the French would call repoussé. It's a mold, and you hammer soft metal into the mold so you can use the mold several times. The Egyptians, the ancient Egyptians, believed that there was an afterlife. That's why they built the pyramids. In my book by Thich Nhat Hanh, his impression is different. His impression is based on the idea of interbeing. That we are all, to steal Carl Sagan's phrase, we are all star stuff. You know, that the particles that make us up have been around for millions and millions of years. I have a little haiku at home. I've had it since college, which, you know, I think back on that and I go, whoa, 45 years ago. It's, man's life does not fill 100 years, but always is full of 100 years' care. And it ends, why not today? Like, why not reach out and be here now? Don't put off your happiness. On the flip side, if you don't have a moral compass, if you don't know right from wrong, if you don't have a set of beliefs, you can become very narcissistic, very hedonistic. It could be all about you, and the reality is it isn't. But some things are kind of almost magical the way they happen. I can remember a couple of years ago, I was very heavy, very heavy. I mean, I'm heavy now, but I was very heavy. And I was feeling really unwell. And a friend of mine said, you should go and visit Marley at the Gloucester Y. And I thought, I can't get in a swimming suit. You've got to be kidding me. And there, at the second glance, with the tag still on it, was this bathing suit. I got in it. And I took Marley's aqua aerobics class for the next 3.5 years. I lost quite a bit of weight. And I toned up, which for me was like more important because I felt stronger and I felt healthier and I looked better in my clothing. And then I had knee surgery, and that kind of set me back. I tried to go back with the Rockport Senior Center, and I ran into some problems parking and blah, blah. And I saw Marley, and she said, you really need to get back in the water. Well, the Rockport Inn Suites has a swimming pool, a lovely swimming pool, and you can buy a membership there. And since I pass them every time I go out to do anything, marketing, the grocery shopping, go get the dry cleaning, go to the transfer station and drop off the garbage, go to the Common Crow and get my favorite yogurt, whatever, I go by the Rockport Inn Suites, both ways. So I've taken to throwing my gym bag in the car. I have no excuse. If I don't go on the way out, I've got to go on the way back. And I set a manageable goal. I go 3 times a week. It really seems to be helping. I don't know that I'll ever be as beautiful as Ailey's dance troupe people. Kevin took me to see them down at the Bosch Center of the Wang Theater. They were amazing. They did a piece that was very Southern Black religious based. It was gorgeous. They got a standing ovation for about 5 minutes. I'm interested in what other people think and believe. There's a woman named Ruth Naomi Floyd, and she did a CD called Fan into Flame. It's on contourrecords.com. You can find it, and it's fascinating to hear Bible verses, small, pithy Bible verses, sung in a jazz style. And I got this CD. I'm old enough, I love CDs. It's called Waterbone Tibet. It's kind of interesting. It's ancient visions in an extraordinary mix of trip-hop grooves and organic voicings. And the reason I brought it in is they had all kinds of craziness happen when they were trying to do this. They're traveling with this sadhu, and he has some cachet, and so the monks let them come in and record them chanting. I remember as a little girl, the priests and the brothers and the deacons would do Gregorian chants Holy Week. And I found this old CD at second glance. It's John Mayer, Room for Squares. I like it because it has one of my favorite of his songs, Your Body's a Wonderland. It's so old that the jewel case is broken, but his artwork is of him as a little boy, and the actual CD has the periodic table on it. The CD is called Room for Squares. And I got to thinking about the fact that I haven't done any continuing education in chemistry since I burnt a hole in my pantyhose in high school with a strong base solution. Burnt the heck out of myself. So Kevin said, well, that's cool. If you want to do some chemistry, I'll sit through chemistry with you. We got a new great courses on chemistry. The guy's fascinating, but my husband and I were kind of funny. We were like kids because we liked the experiments way better than the math. One of the things that we discovered when we were in Virginia, we were in integrated church and the Chapel of the Centurion at Fort Monroe. And one of the fellows said, you know, if you're going to have a religious something, you better feed the people. And one of the things that they would feed the people is fried chicken. And I got the taste for Southern fried chicken. And I was thrilled to find that there's this little place, like a little hole in the wall, called Poppy's Fried Chicken in Gloucester. And they do it the Southern way. Like, it's not like when you go to Market Basket and you get chicken breasts, chicken tenders, chicken thighs, and chicken drumsticks. They take a cleaver and they cut the chicken any which way. And I asked about that when I was down in Virginia, and I was told, well, there's only one chicken per family, and no one person gets a whole breast. You have to share with everybody the best parts. I've been learning these brush painting things, and I found a set by Bien Fang, which is, I think, a German company. It's a subsidiary of Speedball, but they made these water-type brushes shaped like this with the color already in them. And I've been going to Elizabeth Hardy for acupuncture. I'm not sure I like being a human pincushion, but it is an interesting idea of how to interact with the body through special points that they discovered were energy points on meridians. And the entire body has these points. And I've had quite a few of these little points with needles, little fine needles, even finer than my seed bead needle, sticking out of me, trying to move my energy. And it's a coloring book so that it will help me remember, because I'm getting a little dry in the brain. I don't remember things as well as I used to. So I'm trying another Oriental remedy for forgetfulness. It's instant Korean Panax ginseng. Comes out of South Korea, and it's supposed to help you with your memory. I'll let you know if it works. But these were fun, you know, these are so different, these crayons, from the crayons I grew up with as a child that had the paper on them. These are like, you screw the bottom screw and they come out the top. They don't break, they're sturdy. It was kind of interesting. Crayons for grown-ups, coloring books for grown-ups. I feel like I'm entering kind of my second childhood. Kevin and I are going to be taking a trip, so I'm going to do something a little bit different for you if it works out for May. So I hope you'll enjoy it. It's a sweet show. But I wanted to show you this. This is kind of something, it's a traveling shaving brush from the Victorian or Edwardian era. You have the little brush, it's boar's hair bristle and silver. You plunk the brush into the tube, and the tube has a pierced ventilated cap so the brush can dry properly. Just kind of interesting. Nowadays, everything's plastic. Comes in aerosol cans. Why did I say rites of spring twice? Well, children are taking to the streets, saying if adults can't pass gun control laws so we aren't murdered in our schools with automatic weapons fire, then we will make our voices heard. We need protection. It was very reassuring to see so many youth out in the streets trying to get laws passed so that civilians aren't buying military-grade weapons and using them on their neighbors. I was very proud of them. Made me hopeful for the future. We're almost out of time. That's all for now. This has been Marjohn Love on Marjohn's Musings, brought to you by 1623 Studios.